Jamil Pacquiao stepped quietly into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, holding a small slip of paper that represented a minor traffic violation he hoped to resolve. The case wasn't dramatic, just a simple ticket that anyone could receive, but the atmosphere still made him slightly tense. Even so, he carried himself with respect, keeping his shoulders relaxed and his expression calm. No one in the room recognized him, and he preferred it that way. To the clerks, the officers, and the people waiting for their turn, he looked like any other young man seeking a fair chance to explain a small misunderstanding. When his name was called, Jamil approached the bench with a polite nod. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his kindness and gentle humor, greeted him warmly, just as he did with everyone who stood before him. His voice carried reassurance, softening the anxiety that many people felt in a courtroom. Jamil responded with equal respect, speaking clearly and courteously, though a hint of nervousness lingered in his tone. Judge Caprio looked over the citation and asked Jamil to explain what had happened. Jamil listened attentively, waiting for the right moment to speak. Everything about him, from his posture to his quiet tone, reflected humility. It was the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, yet naturally drew people in. Still, no one realized that the young man standing there was the son of one of the most legendary figures in boxing history. Jamil made no effort to reveal it, focusing only on the matter at hand. The courtroom remained peaceful, with the usual murmurs of observers fading into a distant hum. Judge Caprio continued reviewing the situation, unaware of the story hidden behind the polite young man in front of him. There was nothing unusual about the interaction, at least not yet, but what the judge didn't know was that the quiet, respectful individual presenting his case had grown up in the shadow of a global icon. And although Jamil wasn't trying to draw attention to himself, the truth about his identity would soon surface in a way no one expected. Audience hook. But when Judge Caprio finally learned who was standing before him, the entire courtroom went silent. The moment of realization would not come through boastfulness or dramatic reveal, but through a simple question that would naturally shift the atmosphere. Before anyone knew it, an ordinary case would turn into a moment the courtroom would never forget. Today, Judge Frank Caprio began the hearing with his usual calm, attentive presence. He looked down at the citation in front of him, scanned the details, then lifted his gaze toward the young man standing at the podium. Jamil Pacquiao waited respectfully, hands clasped, his posture showing a mix of nervousness and composure. Even though the case was small, the formality of the courtroom still carried weight, and Judge Caprio could sense that the young man wanted to handle the matter properly. "Tell me what happened," the judge said in his warm, steady tone. Jamil nodded politely before explaining the situation. He described the day calmly, starting from when he noticed the flashing lights behind him to the moment the officer handed him the ticket. There was no attempt to over-explain, dramatize, or shift the blame. Instead, he spoke with clarity and respect, acknowledging the possibility that he might have misjudged the moment, even if he hadn't intended to break any rules. His careful choice of words reflected genuine humility. As Jamil continued, Judge Caprio observed him closely. The judge had seen thousands of people come through his courtroom, some anxious, some defensive, some frustrated, and some argumentative. But Jamil seemed different. His composure stood out. He didn't rush his explanations, didn't raise his voice, and didn't show any sign of entitlement or defiance. Instead, he spoke with a tone that was thoughtful and grounded. The judge leaned back slightly and asked, "Are you working or studying right now?" Jamil replied softly, "Both, Your Honor. I'm studying, and I work part-time. It keeps me disciplined." His answer was simple, yet it carried weight. There was no hint of pride or desire for attention, only sincerity. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, quietly impressed by his manners. It wasn't common to see someone so young speak with such restraint. Judge Caprio nodded. It's good to hear that. Responsibility at a young age teaches you a lot. He paused before adding, You seem very respectful. Has someone guided you that way? Yes, Your Honor, Jimule replied. My family always reminds me to stay respectful, no matter the circumstances. The judge smiled approvingly, sensing that the young man's humility came from a meaningful upbringing. Still, he hadn't yet realized who Jimule truly was. Something about the way the young man spoke, however, made him wonder about his background. It wasn't normal for someone his age to demonstrate such poise. As the conversation continued, Judge Caprio asked more questions, not invasive ones, but questions meant to better understand the mindset behind the polite young man standing before him. Jimule answered every one of them with the same quiet confidence. He didn't hold back, yet he didn't boast. He simply shared honest thoughts about responsibility, patience, and learning from mistakes. At one point, the judge stopped writing, folded his hands, and looked directly at him. You know, he said, I meet many people who rush through life without thinking about how their actions affect others. But you seem to approach things differently. Jimule lowered his gaze modestly. I try to. Your Honor, my parents always taught me to stay grounded. The courtroom felt a subtle shift as observers realized they were witnessing a rare moment. A young man whose humility spoke louder than his words. Judge Caprio wasn't aware of the famous name behind the modest smile, but he could already sense that this was not an ordinary encounter. Engagement. Break. Have you ever met someone who impressed you with just their humility? Comment yes if you believe respect always wins. The conversation in the courtroom gradually shifted from the details of the ticket to something deeper. Judge Frank Caprio, always attentive to the human story behind each case, leaned forward with growing curiosity. There was something about Jimule Pacquiao that didn't feel ordinary. His calm posture, respectful tone, and unwavering humility suggested a background shaped by strong guidance and meaningful values. Wanting to understand him better, the judge began asking questions that went beyond the citation. Tell me a little more about yourself, Judge Caprio said gently. What's life like for you outside of this situation? Jimule hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Then he answered with the same steady respect he had shown from the beginning. He spoke about his studies, his work, and his efforts to balance both. He talked about discipline, responsibility, and staying focused despite challenges. Nothing he said sounded rehearsed. His words carried the sincerity of someone who tried to do the right thing, not for praise but out of principle. The judge nodded, listening intently. And what about your family? He asked. Who has influenced you the most? Jimule took a soft breath before replying. My parents, Your Honor. They taught me that no matter who you are, respect and humility come first. They always said that character is more important than anything else. The audience listened quietly, struck by the young man's maturity. Something about the way he spoke suggested that he had grown up around strong values that weren't just taught but lived. The judge felt it too. There was a depth beneath the surface that didn't fit the profile of an average traffic hearing. Judge Caprio continued. Have you faced any struggles along the way? Jimule nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I grew up with opportunities, but also with expectations. People sometimes assume things about you before they even know you. That can be difficult. It teaches you to stay grounded. He paused. My father always reminded me that success means nothing if you don't have respect. Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the mention of Jimule's father. Your father sounds like a man with strong principles. He is, Jimule replied with a humble smile. He taught me that discipline and humility matter more than anything you achieve. The judge's curiosity deepened. This young man wasn't just polite. He carried the kind of wisdom that usually came from seeing life up close, perhaps from watching someone overcome significant challenges. The judge sensed that Jimuel's story held more than he was letting on, yet the young man never bragged or hinted at fame. Everything he shared focused on lessons, not labels. "Tell me about your goals," the judge asked. "Where do you see yourself in the future?" Jimuel responded thoughtfully, "I want to build a life based on my own efforts. Your Honor, I'm grateful for everything I've been given, but I want to earn my own path. My parents always taught me to stay responsible and to stay humble, no matter where life takes me." The judge felt a genuine respect forming for the young man in front of him. It was rare for someone so young to speak with such clarity and modesty. He couldn't help but wonder how someone with this outlook was raised and what influences had shaped him into the person he was today. Across the courtroom, a quiet emotional shift spread among the observers. People watched with admiration, sensing that the young man wasn't leaning on privilege or recognition. Instead, he presented himself as someone who valued character over attention. It was refreshing, almost inspiring to witness someone in a courtroom display such humility without being prompted. Judge Caprio took a moment to gather his thoughts before asking another question. "Your father must be proud of you. What has he taught you about life?" Jimuel looked down slightly, a soft expression crossing his face. "He taught me that discipline creates opportunity. He told me that respect is something you never lose by giving. And he always said that humility keeps you strong." The judge smiled gently, his expression reflecting both respect and curiosity. He still didn't know who Jimuel's father was, but he could already sense that this was no ordinary family story. The young man had carried values from someone who understood struggle, perseverance, and growth. Around the courtroom, people felt an emotional warmth building. For a moment, it didn't feel like a traffic hearing. It felt like a glimpse into a young man's journey shaped by responsibility, gratitude, and character. Judge Frank Caprio continued observing Jimuel with thoughtful interest, sensing that there was more beneath the young man's calm exterior. His respectful tone, disciplined posture, and grounded presence all hinted at an upbringing shaped by meaningful guidance. But up to this point, Jimuel had avoided mentioning anything about his family name or background. He answered every question with humility, keeping the focus on values rather than identity. It was only natural that the judge's curiosity grew stronger with each moment. "Let me ask you something," Judge Caprio said, leaning forward slightly. "You mentioned your father taught you discipline and humility. What kind of work does he do?" Jimuel paused, offering a polite smile before answering. "He has a unique career, Your Honor. Most people know him for his accomplishments, but he always tells me that character matters more than achievement." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good message. But what exactly does he do?" There was a gentle silence in the courtroom as Jimuel considered how to respond. He wasn't trying to hide anything, nor was he trying to impress anyone. But he was careful with his words, the way someone might be when they wanted to avoid sounding proud. "He's involved in sports, Your Honor," Jimuel finally said. "He's an athlete, and he's also served in public office." The judge raised his eyebrows slightly. "An athlete and a public servant? That's an uncommon combination. What sport was he involved in?" Jimuel looked down for a moment, then lifted his eyes again. "Boxing, Your Honor." At that moment, a faint murmur rippled through the courtroom. Boxing, public office, respect, discipline. Those clues began connecting in the minds of the people watching. Even Judge Caprio felt a spark of recognition forming. Though he didn't want to assume anything too quickly, he leaned forward, studying the young man's calm face. "Boxing is a tough sport. Not many reach the top. Did your father compete professionally?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jimuel said softly. The judge paused for a moment, tapping the side of his pen. The pieces fit together almost too perfectly. A boxing legend who also served in public office. Someone known around the world for both work ethic and humility. Someone whose journey from poverty to greatness was almost unmatched. Deciding to ask directly, Judge Caprio tilted his head and said, "Wait, are you related to Manny Pacquiao?" The question seemed to freeze the entire room for half a second. People stopped shifting, whispering, and breathing. Every eye turned toward Jimuel, waiting for the answer. Jimuel offered a shy, almost embarrassed smile before nodding. "Yes, Your Honor, he's my father." A sudden wave of astonished whispers spread across the courtroom. "That's Manny Pacquiao's son? No way, really? Unbelievable." The murmurs rose and fell like a quiet wave, yet Jimuel remained steady, grounded, and respectful. He didn't smile as if expecting admiration. He didn't boast, gesture proudly, or act as though the revelation should change anything. Instead, he simply stood there with the same humility he had shown since the moment he entered the courtroom. Judge Caprio blinked in surprise before smiling warmly. "Well, that certainly explains the discipline," he said with a gentle laugh. "Your father is one of the greatest boxers to ever step into the ring." Jimuel nodded humbly. "Thank you, Your Honor, but he always reminds me not to rely on his name. He wants me to become someone strong on my own." The judge looked deeply moved by the sincerity of that statement. That's a powerful lesson. Fame can open doors, but character decides whether those doors stay open. Across the courtroom, people watched in admiration as the young man remained composed, refusing to lean on his father's legend for special treatment. His humility stood in stark contrast to the weight of the name he carried. The discovery only made his earlier actions, his respect, his patience, his honesty shine even brighter. What had started as a simple traffic case had turned into a moment no one expected, revealing a young man who honored his father not through words of pride, but through the values he lived every day. And everyone there felt the impact of that truth. For a long moment after Jimuel revealed his identity, the courtroom remained wrapped in a stunned silence. Judge Frank Caprio looked at the young man with a mixture of surprise, admiration, and reflection. Manny Pacquiao was a global icon, one of the greatest boxers who had ever lived. A man who rose from poverty to become a world champion and a respected public servant. Yet before him stood Manny's son, displaying not fame or arrogance, but humility so genuine it softened the entire room. Judge Caprio leaned back slowly, taking in the moment. "Your father," he began softly, "has one of the most extraordinary life stories I have ever seen. From the hardships he went through as a child to the heights he reached in boxing. It is truly remarkable." Jimuel bowed his head respectfully. "Yes, Your Honor, his journey inspires me every day." The judge nodded thoughtfully, his mind drifting back to memories of Manny Pacquiao's early interviews, stories of sleeping in the streets, selling bread to survive, fighting to support his family. The contrast between that beginning and the young man standing before him now made the courtroom feel almost emotional. "You know," Judge Caprio continued, "your father is celebrated not just because he won titles or fought great champions. He is admired because he never forgot where he came from. Even after reaching the top, he remained grounded. People respected him because he respected others. And I have to say, looking at you today, I can see that same humility." Jimuel's expression softened. "That means a lot, Your Honor. My father always tells me that success without humility is empty." "That is wisdom," the judge replied warmly. "And it is rare, very rare, to see someone your age understand that." A quiet hush settled over the room as the judge paused, allowing the weight of his words to linger. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Caprio shared a story from his own life. "When I was a young boy," he said, "my parents didn't have much money. My father worked long hours, and my mother taught me that dignity doesn't come from what you own, but how you treat people. I remember one winter when a man in our neighborhood lost his job. People whispered about him. But my mother invited his family over for dinner without a word. She didn't ask for anything in return. She simply believed that respect should be given freely. Jimiel listened intently, absorbing every word. The judge continued, "That moment shaped me. It taught me that kindness, humility, and respect are not signs of weakness, they're signs of strength. And I see those qualities in you today, just as people saw them in your father as he rose through hardship." Emotion flickered across Jimiel's face, subtle but genuine. He nodded quietly. "I tried to honor what my parents taught me, Your Honor. They always reminded me that blessings come with responsibility." "That's a good philosophy," Judge Caprio said warmly. "And I hope you understand how proud your father would be to see you standing here, not because of your last name, but because of your character." Several people in the audience wiped their eyes. The moment felt bigger than a hearing. It felt like a reminder of something meaningful, something society often forgot amid noise and distraction. "This courtroom sees many people," the judge continued. "Some come in angry, some frightened, some careless. But once in a while, someone walks in who reminds us that values still matter. Today, that someone is you." Jimiel lowered his gaze again, overwhelmed by the sincerity in the judge's voice. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his tone filled with gratitude. "That means more than you know." Judge Caprio smiled gently. "Humility isn't inherited, it's chosen. Fame can be given, money can come and go, but respect is earned. And today, you have earned mine." A warm stillness draped over the room. People looked at Jimiel differently now, not as the son of a global legend, but as a young man who carried his father's greatest legacy, character. The judge placed the citation down and folded his hands. "Your father fought in the ring. But the battles outside the ring, the battles of humility, kindness, and responsibility, those are the ones that truly define greatness." And at that moment, it felt as though everyone in the courtroom was witnessing something unforgettable. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Frank Caprio prepared to deliver his decision. But it was clear that this moment had grown far beyond a simple traffic matter. Everyone present could feel the weight of what had unfolded, an unexpected meeting between a young man of remarkable humility and a judge known for wisdom and compassion. The air carried a sense of reflection, as if the entire room had paused to appreciate the deeper meaning behind the encounter. Judge Caprio picked up the citation again, glanced at it briefly, then set it aside. "Before I make a ruling," he began, "I want to say something directly to you." Jimiel. Jimiel straightened slightly, listening with full attention. "You walked into this courtroom today for a small case," the judge said. "But what stood out had nothing to do with the violation. What stood out was your character. You have shown respect, humility, and responsibility, qualities that matter far more than the details of any ticket." A few people in the audience nodded. Their expression soft. The judge continued, "I meet many individuals who come here frustrated, defensive, or unwilling to accept responsibility. But you approach this moment with calm understanding and sincerity. That tells me a great deal about the kind of man you are becoming." Jimiel bowed his head gratefully. "Thank you, Your Honor. I also want to acknowledge something important," the judge added. "Your father's legacy is known worldwide. People admire him for his achievements, but what made him truly beloved was his humility and his compassion. And today I see those same qualities reflected in you. That is not something that happens by accident." There was a quiet, emotional stir among the spectators. "With that said," Judge Caprio continued, adjusting his glasses, "regarding your case, I believe this situation was an honest misunderstanding. You have demonstrated responsibility, and I see no sign of carelessness or disregard for the law. For those reasons, I am dismissing your citation." A soft wave of relief crossed Jimuel's face, though he remained composed. "However," the judge added firmly yet kindly, "my message to you goes beyond the decision. You carry a name that is recognized across the world. But names alone are not what define us. It is our actions, our choices, our values. Those are the things that shape who we become." "I understand, Your Honor," Jimuel said with sincerity. "I try to live by those values every day." "And I can tell that you do," the judge replied warmly. "Hold on to that humility. Hold on to that respect. They will guide you far more than any kind of fame or recognition." Jimuel nodded deeply. "I appreciate your words, Your Honor. They mean a lot to me." Judge Caprio leaned back, his expression gentle but wise. "The world needs more young people who lead with character. You may not realize it, but the way you carry yourself sets an example for others. Never underestimate the impact of simple kindness." The audience felt the emotional truth of the moment. Some wiped tears. Others smiled quietly. Jimuel then spoke softly. "Thank you for your fairness and your kindness. Your Honor, I'm grateful for your decision, but even more grateful for your guidance." The judge smiled. "That gratitude is exactly why you will go far. Remember, true greatness doesn't shout. It quietly shines." Jimuel offered a respectful bow of his head. "I will remember that, sir." With that, Judge Caprio brought the hearing to a close, but the moment felt like the beginning of something far more meaningful, a powerful reminder of what humility can inspire.